Okay, so it's a pleasure to be with all of you. You know, this is, as our dear friend Reb Shlomo said, these are unusual times, but nothing is normal. Nothing is normal for the past half year. But Baruch Hashem, we keep on learning, we keep on teaching. It's the only constant. It's the only anchor of stability that we have in these unbelievably tumultuous times. So, Baruch Hashem, it's the same Torah, it's the same Lamdei Torah, it's the same Chedros the Shmaitza, and it's Zman Simchoseinu. In normal circumstances, Chol Hamoed is one of the highlights of my Harbotzos Torah. I give a few shiurim every day, and literally thousands of people come. Especially in a year like this, when we have the full Chol Hamoed, we don't have Shabbos in the middle. So, one of my family members once made a cheshbon. When we have a full Chol Hamoed like this year, I usually give shiurim to 10,000 people, and that's an amazing number. These are numbers we only see at a Siyam Shas, at a huge event. But throughout a Chol Hamoed, about 10,000 people come to my shiurim. And this year, it's not to be. But maybe throughout this Chol Hamoed, taking into account all the people that will be seeing my shiurim in various different venues, maybe it surpasses 10,000. So, Baruch Hashem, I thank you, Kodesh Baruch Hu. And this Yachi Kala V'Agudas Yisrael. So we're used to Yachi Kalas in Yerushalayim in America, and Yachi Kala usually is 3 days, 4 days. From my point of view, we've been having a Yachi Kala for the past 7 months, and Baruch Hashem, nobody knows how long it'll still take. So the Matzav in Yisrael is not very good. We still have thousands of new cases every day. The numbers are slightly down, but nobody really knows whether the Matzav is better or people just do less testing because it's Chol Hamoed, it's Yom Tov. We don't really know. Total confusion. But what is very disturbing is also total lack of discipline, and people are fighting the police, and it's very sad. I don't want to sound critical, definitely not. Zman Simchoseinu. So daven for us. This week Rebbe passed away. The Pittsburgh Rebbe passed away from Corona. So you would think that people would be more careful after, when tragedy strikes so close. But it's not exactly the situation. So let us daven that the Kodesh Baruch Hu send refuahs and Yeshuas. And we should only be able to share B'Seides Toivos, and we should only be able to come back to normalcy and to our normal routine and our normal schedules. And it should all be with Siyata D'Shmaya. So, Baruch Hashem, it's a big schus. And part of Simchas Yom Tov is Simchas HaTorah. V'somachto b'chagecha. And the Rambam in Perek Vav of Hilchos Yom Tov explains that a person needs to be sameach v'toiv leiv hu v'ishtoi v'bono v'bnei beisoi. And part of being sameach v'toiv leiv, besides the gdorim that Chazal defined, anoshem b'bosa v'yayin, anoshem b'bigdei tzeloinim, tinoikes b'kloyes v'agoizim, just being sameach v'toiv leiv. And does anything make us happier than Talmud Torah? B'kudei Hashem yishorim esamche leiv. So if Tisha B'Av we cannot learn, because we should not be happy, that means that Yom Tov we should learn, and that is part of Simchas HaChag v'Somachto b'Chagecho. So today's shiur will be a fascinating chiddush, something which really, when people hear this from me, they're taking, I won't say shocked, because being shocked has somewhat of a negative connotation, but they're surprised. I once heard from Reb David Lipschitz from America. He was Rav in Soval. He was one of the younger Talmidim of Reb Shimon Shkop. The Reb Shimon in the yeshiva sometimes used to say, he was a gewaldige Chadshim, gewaldige Machadish. And sometimes when he said a svara, and the Talmidim were taken aback, he said that a new svara is like a new suit. Just get used to it. So a person comes to the tailor or to the store and he buys a suit and he puts it on. He doesn't feel so comfortable. And the guy selling the suit says, you know, come back in a week. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. You just need to get used to it. You know, it's different. So the Shimon said a svara, and sometimes he said, let's talk about it in a few days. Just get used to it. And I say the same regarding what we're going to discuss today. So the Einig Yom Tov, Simon Mem Tes, comes up with a Gevaldige Kasha. To him, it's not a Kasha. To the Einig Yom Tov, it's a psak. To me, it's a Kasha, and not a psak. And I'll explain why. So in Sukkah Daf Tes, the Gemara says that a Sukkah is Osor Bahanoa Midiuraisa. And that's a halacha psuka. You cannot derive benefit, pleasure from your Sukkah. It is to be dedicated, isketzoy lemitzvoise, hamistapik min sukkah. If you have wine or oil hanging in your Sukkah, and you know, and you're making kiddush, and you say that bottle hanging up there from the roof, from the schach, is a very good wine, and you want to drink from it, that's an issa. So, pashtas asugyas and issa diuraisa, the Gemara learns, chag asukah istaselacho, iske suga lachagiga. Chagiga is a korban. It's kachim. There's an issa me'ila behegdish, so the same applies to sukkah. The sukkah is also banoah. So the Einig Yom Tov asks, b'shas yeridas geshamim, if you sit in the sukkah, you're over on an issa diuraisa. Because right now, you don't have a mitzvah. And if you don't have a mitzvah, the sukkah is also banoah. I'm getting wet. But if not for the schach, you would be drenched. So the schach gives you some level of protection. You're not getting as wet as you would be getting if not for the schach on top of your head. So that is hanoah. So the Einig Yom Tov argues, b'shas yeridas geshamim, you have to get out of your sukkah because it's also banoah. So why do I say, to me, that's not a psak, but more of a kasha? Because many anoshim gedolim, befrat in the Hasidic world, but not only in the Hasidic world, went to great extremes, and they didn't leave the sukkah, even b'shas yeridas geshamim. So I think it was about 46 years ago, I spent Yom Tov in Union City, New Jersey, with my great Rebbe, with the Kloisim of the Rebbe. I'll never forget that Succos. It was raining cats and dogs for 7 straight days, almost. There were rains through Yom Tov, and the Rebbe didn't leave the Sukkah. He didn't leave the Sukkah. And he made a tish in the Sukkah. One of the great Rabbeim in America, and that same Succos left the Sukkah and he made a tish in the shul. And the Kloisenberger Rebbe was very unhappy about it. And he said, if Chazal say, Moshe le'eved shemoze kois la'rabbi v'shofach lo'kitan al ponav, eini chofetz b'shimushcho, then you leave the Sukkah embarrassed, humble, and you don't make a tish outside the sukkah. I could identify with both points of view. I think that other Rebbe also had a point. Okay, so I'll put them in a sukkah, but it's still Yom Tov. It's still Yom Tov. And why not be Sameach v'Simchas Yom Tov with the Hasidim? If we're potem in a sukkah, we're not potem from Simchas Yom Tov. And the mere fact that Rebbes make a tish means that it's part of Avodas Hashem. So I definitely could see two sides to this question. But the Kloisenberger didn't leave his sukkah. And the Hasidim were sitting there, everybody covering his strimal with plastic bags. And I saw a moifus. One little plate of soup, and the Rebbe gave shrine to 100 people. So I'm just paraphrasing a Gemara in a Dorim Daf Mem, when the Gemara uses that expression regarding a din and Hilchos Mekvois, which is something different than what we are actually discussing. So anyway, so the only Yom Tov argues, if it's raining, you have an issa to sit in the sukkah because it's also bahanoah. So as I explained, so many Anoshim Gedolim did sit in the sukkah. From my point of view, that they were over an innocent Yoraisa. So I deal with this question as a kasha. And I want to suggest 3 drachim. 2 are based on Gedol Achroinim, but the Iker Derech Laniyas Daiti is number 3. So I'll briefly discuss 2 other drachim. The Goen, Tov Reish Lamed Tes, has a vikuach with the Ramah. It's actually not the Ramah, but it's a machlokes in the Shoyin brought in the Rosh and the Ram in Masechet Sukkah. First night Sukkos, we have a chiyuv of achilas kazayas pas besukkah, and this chiyuv is learned gzeira shavet tesvov mechag hamatzos. Besides the mitzvah that is noyeg kol shiva, the Sukkah stays with Shivas Yomim, which is fundamentally a mitzvah kiyumis. A few weeks ago, I give so many shurim, I no longer remember what I say where and when, but I do remember that one of our recent shurim, I think the latest one was Begeder Mitzvah Sukkah. And we briefly discussed this, but many Achronim understand, Kol Shivot's only a mitzvah kiyumis. If you eat achilas kva, you need to eat in the Sukkah. But Leil Aleph, we learn Gzeres Shavak, Gzeres Tezvov, Mechag HaMatzos, that you have a chiyuv to eat kazayas pas in the Sukkah. Is there a din mitzvah put on a sukkah by Leil Aleph? That's a machlokes rishonim. There are more paskins. The first night, even if it's raining, you need to eat in the sukkah. Because mitzvah put on a sukkah, we learn from the sukkah's teishvu, and that is Shivas Yomim. First night, there is no ptur of mitzvah. And the Goen in Bir Agro disagrees, and he says, when it's raining, lav shem sukkah Allah. It's not a sukkah. Doesn't have a shem sukkah. So how could there be a mitzvah to sit in the sukkah if lav shem, it's not a sukkah? If it's not a sukkah, then it wouldn't be also bahanoah. So that would be miyashiv, the kasha of the Oineg Yom Tov. If it's not a sukkah, then there definitely would not be any Isser Hanoah. But how do we understand the Goen? Why is it not a sukkah? Would the Goen say the same if there are flies or mosquitoes, or it's hot, or it's cold? Lav shem sukkah. Mitzvah put them in a sukkah is a din in the gavra. Teishavu ke'en taduru. It's not a din in the sukkah. L'chayr, it's a din in the gavra. Teishavu ke'en taduru. Mitzvah potur min a sukkah. It's just a ptur. How does it affect the cheftza of the sukkah? So maybe the aside of the Goen is not based on the din of mitzvah, but rather very first Rashi in Masechet Sukkah. Sukkah shilamala mi'esrim. Rashi says, Al Shem haschach kruyo sukkah. The word sukkah is based on schach. So essentially, what is a sukkah? It's not the floor. It's not even the tfanas, even though we need tfanas. It's all about the schach. And the word schach means sochech. It gives you shelter. So maybe b'shas yeridas geshomim, if the schach doesn't give you shelter, then it's not a sukkah. But that is once again it's sorechiyun, because the schach does give you shelter. That was the kasha. It keeps some of the rain away. But the bigger problem is, if that is the way we would explain the Goen, so why do Chazal say b'shas yidis geshomim yipota, because mitzvah pota in a sukkah? Why don't they say because it's not a sukkah? You're not sitting in a sukkah. Explanation number 2. Maybe according to the Goen, it's a dira srucha. Just like a sukkah that has tvanas asorat tvochem, but if the schach is hanging into the asorat tvochem, the Gemara says it's a dira srucha, you can't be yoitza. And that din of dira srucha is based on mitzvah. We do find in Masechet Moed Cotton, and it's brought in Bir Alochas Semetov Kuf Mem Ritva. The Ritva says, if your roof is leaking, you could fix it on Chalamoid because the dir is a dir Srucha. Would we say the same regarding Sukkah B'Shas Yeriz Geshem? My mamish don't think so. You know, sometimes people catch on to words, but sometimes words, even the same words, don't exactly mean the same Hagdara, the same thing. So regarding Meleches Chalamoid, that it writes as a dir Srucha, and therefore you could fix it on Chalamoid, has nothing to do with Sukkah. So, la'aniyas daiti. The way to understand the Gaon is he doesn't really mean that it's not a sukkah, it's a sukkah. What the Gaon means to argue, even if there would be no ptur of mitztayer b'leil aleph, but it's not mistavet that a sukkah which is not ra'ui lemitzvahs yeshivas sukkah, still there would be a mitzvah to sit in that sukkah b'leil aleph. Even though the first night is learned from Gzeres Shava, there might not be a ptur of personal mitztayer. You know, some people are tormented by mosquitoes, and some people don't even know what a mosquito bite is. Either mosquitoes don't bite them, or they don't develop an allergic effect. They're not even aware that mosquitoes are biting them. So some mitztayer are very personal. But Yeridas Geshomim, no one feels comfortable when it's raining and pouring on his head. So the way I would understand the Gaon, a sukkah that is not ra'ui l'kiyum mitzvah is not considered a sukkah's mitzvah, and even b'leil aleph. After all, we learn tezvav mechag hamatzos, but it's a mitzvah of sukkah. It's not a mitzvah of matzah, it's a mitzvah of sukkah. And if a sukkah is not ra'ui l'sheves ba, it's not mistavet that you have a mitzvah of yeshiva sukkah, even leil aleph. That is the way I would understand the Gaon. I just want to comment. Bir Agron Arachaim is not Ksav Yodei Shel Gaon, it's Kizvei Talmidim. So I think we do not need to be medaktek l'shoinus to such a great extent. That is the way I understand the Gaon. And Hadra Kushe Leduchte, Im Kain, has nothing to do with the Yonig Yontiv. And the Kasha, once again, Kama Vegam Nitzava. Rabbi Elchanan Kovet Shulam Beitzen. I think it's Ois Ayin. Rabbi Elchanan argues that when a sukkah is not Ra'ui LeMitzvah, there also is no Isser HaNoah. Isser HaNoah and Mitzvah Sukkah are two sides of the same coin. When you're not Mekayim the Mitzvah, there also is no Isser HaNoah. Which to me is also an amazing chiddush, which is tzorech iyun. Number one, why? Why would these two halachas be dependent on one another? Mitzvah potam and sukkah is a din in gavra. Isser HaNoah is a din in chefza. Number two, my second kasha is, so when it's raining, or when there are mosquitoes and flies, when it's hot and it's cold, could you drink the wine that's standing in the sukkah? Could you break off a piece of the schach and use it as a toothpick? Muter lehestapik men a sukkah when you're mitztayer? No, I don't think so. Nobody says that. Still a sukkah has kedushas sukkah. Two people are sitting in the same sukkah. One is mitztayer and one is not, and that's very common. That's very common. Some people are more sensitive to cold. Some people are more sensitive to hot. Especially mosquitoes, as I mentioned before. So Reuven and Shimon are sitting in the sukkah. Reuven is mitztayer and Shimon is not. So Reuven mutar lo lehenois min hasukkah. Shimon asa lo lehenois. Ein hadovar misyashev el haleiv. I mentioned the story before about the Kloiser Magarev sitting in the sukkah. It's important for me, but to stress, he did not make a brocha leisha b'sukkah b'shas yeridas geshamim. Because the Kloisenberger really was a sage, one of the greatest gedolim in our time, and a posek, as we see from Shalas Teshuvas Divrei Yatzef. And he was, one of the great poskim. So he didn't make the bracha, but he did sit in the sukkah. So we come back to the fundamental question of the Oineg Yomtiv. B'shas Yeridas Geshomim. How could you sit in the sukkah if you don't have a mitzvah? Sukkos Amanoah. So let me say this. Mitzvah potem in a sukkah. It's just a ptur. But if a person sits in the sukkah, b'tzar, b'shas yeridas geshomim, he's mekayim a mitzvah. It's just a ptur. Einoi mitzvah v'oisa. But it's still a cheftze the mitzvah. Mehechet tasted to say it's not a mitzvah. Lo imutzino elo masha omru chachamim hamitztaya poto min hasik. It's a ptur. Like noshim b'mitzvah say shein azman grama. Like oisik b'mitzvah poto min ha-mitzvah. There are many different circumstances, cases, matzovim, in which you're poto, but you still have a mitzvah. So my argument is mitzvah poto min ha-sukkah, but it's a cheftze de mitzvah. So why does the Ramah write in Siman Tov Reish Lamed Tes, Yoshev b'sukkah b'shas v'yis shom nikro hedyot, ve'enoi mekabel sachar? And the Achronim say, if he said a brocha, it's a brocha levatola. If it's a mitzvah, how could it be a brocha levatola? So the big yesod I want to say is, we don't get schar for kiyum mitzvahs. We get schar for asiyas retzaynoi yisborach shemoy. We are awarded for making a Kodesh Baruch Hu happy. May sound like a strange definition, but it's not. Don't Chazal say Ashrei Misha Amore B'Torah V'Oiseh Nachas Ruach Liyotzei. We're here to make a Kodesh Baruch Hu happy. Oiseh Nachas Ruach Liyotzei. There are matzovim in which a person is makayim a mitzvah and he gets no sachar. Regarding the cheftze, it's a mitzvah. Technically, it's a mitzvah, but essentially, Kodesh Baruch Hu doesn't want this mitzvah, and you need to adhere to a Kodesh Baruch Hu's will. And I want to give a few examples. But first of all, let me explain mitzvah. Especially b'shas yeridas geshomim, because yeridas geshomim is a tzara to everyone. It's not personal. And it is only b'shas yeridas geshomim that Chazal say, Moshe le'eved shemoza kois le'rabbi v'shofach lo'ikitoin al ponav. Eini chofetz b'shimushcho. If you're a servant of the king is angry, and he tells you, leave my room. I don't want to see you here. Would you refuse? I'm so loyal. I want to serve the king. I'm not leaving. You're going to be thrown into jail. You were asked to leave. You bow down with tears and you humbly leave the room. Eini chofetz b'shimushcho. You got to do tshuva. Step out of your sukkah and do tshuva. That is what Chazal teach us. And Chazal are the only ones that speak in the name of a Kodesh Baruch Hu. So technically it's a mitzvah, because we have no source to say it's not a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah. Mitzvah potem in a mitzvah. Mitzvah potem in a sukkah. It's not more than a ptur. But this is not like a ptur of Isha b'mitzvah say shazman grama. An Isha is a volunteer. In every hospital there are volunteers that do amazing work. And the management appreciates their work. It's so important. There's a difference between a person that was kicked out and a person that is not getting paid for his services, but he volunteers. So when a woman is Makayim Mitzvah Sasei Shazman Grama, it is extremely appreciated by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. According to the Havim of Rav Yosef, Godel Mishael Mitzvah Voisa B'Misha Mitzvah Voisa. According to the Ramoshi, makes a bracha. If you sit in the Sukkah B'Shas, you read this Kishomim, technically it's like an Isho B'Mitzvah Sasei Shazman Grama. Technically it's a mitzvah, but essentially it's different. The woman by Mitzvah Sasei Shazman Grama is a volunteer. She's not getting paid. She's not on the payroll. And she volunteers. But the person that sits in the Sukkah B'Shas at Eidos Geshorim was asked to leave. And if he doesn't leave, that's a chutzpah. Eini chofetz v'shemushcha. And therefore he gets no sachar. Not only doesn't he get schar, it's a brocha levatala. Because berachas hamitzvahs are derabanan. Chachamim are the ones that were metaken berachas hamitzvah. Many months ago, I gave a shiur on berachas hamitzvah. Maybe some of you were listening to that shiur. It was in the context of Yarchi Kala Vaguda, the virtual Yarchi Kala. So berachas hamitzvah are derabanan. Chachamim are the ones that say you need to make a brocha, and Chachamim are the ones that say if it's raining, leave the sukkah. And if you are supposed to leave the sukkah, don't say Asher kedesholu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu, and therefore it's a brocha levatala. V'nikro hedyet, because if the king, if the master asks you to leave, then you humbly leave, and you don't stay. So Yesoida Devorim, technically, it's a cheftzah the mitzvah. It's a ma'isa mitzvah. And if it's a ma'isa mitzvah, it can be also banoah. On one hand, to say it's a mitzvah, and it's also banoah as a tarta de sata. And therefore, b'shas yeridas gishomim, he is mekayem mitzvah sukkah, and therefore there is no isar hanoah. It's a mitzvah, but it's a mitzvah that HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't want, and therefore nikro hedyet, einoi mekabel schar, and it's a brocha levatol. So many people, and I'm speaking about great lamdonim, have tremendous difficulty to understand. What do you mean if it's a mitzvah? How come you don't get zachar? Isn't that aleph beis of schar ba'odesh? In Yud Gimel Ikrim, the formula that we find in all the Sadurim is Shakodesh Baruch Hu goyim al toiv l'shoyim l'mitzvaysav. Shoyim l'mitzvaysav. So if it's a mitzvah, how come he doesn't get zachar? So I want to bring two other examples. Person performs a mitzvah, but he doesn't get zachar. So in Rosh Hashanah Chof Ches, there's a machlokes in the Gemara, mitzvah sichas kavana, mitzvah sin sichas kavana. One of the examples of this machlokes is hatoikaya l'shiyah. Person blows the shofar. He has no intention of being makayim mitzvah shofar at all. It's coincidental. He happens to blow the shofar in Rosh Hashanah, but his intention is music. Once I had a Baltakaya in my house, a very special person, and he was an unbelievable Baltakaya. And he used to play tunes with his shofar. You know, I and my family, we were just shocked. He used to produce music with the shofar. So this person is Tekeya L'Shir. He is over an Shavus and an Issa Darabanan, Hashmo's Koil. You can't play musical instruments on Shabbos and Yom Tov. But there's a machlokes in Gemara. And according to Rav Nachman, mitzvah sein sichas kavana is yotzi yedei choyva. Would he get zachar? Would he get zachar? Of course not. Why do you expect zachar? You had no intention of being makayim a mitzvah. He's going to get an oynish because he's over on a shuvas and anything that I want him. Our friend is standing in line. When his term comes, he sits according to the next to the pukid. The guy looks in his computer. You know, he adds things up. And he says, well, you're going to Gehenna for 10 years. He asks for what? And he starts reading off the list. Rosh Hashanah, Tavshin Pei Aleph, 3 months Gehenna. For what? For blowing the shofar. Then I deserve Gan Eden. You're mistaking. You know, it's a mistake. You mean 3 months Gan Eden? Says no. According to what's written on my screen, you're Tekeya L'Shir. You just were playing music in your house. You weren't in shul. You didn't go to shul. You didn't want to be Makayim shofar. You were just amusing your kids with your shofar, playing music. 3 months Gehenna. So the person asks, just a minute. So what's my punishment for the fact that I didn't blow shofar? He explains, you did blow shofar because we paskin mitzvah saying sichos kavana up here. So Shulchan Aruch, Simesamach, the Mechaber brings both opinions. Yes, I'm in mitzvah sichos kavana. Yes, I'm in mitzvah saying sichos kavana. Yes, I'm in mitzvah sichos kavana. V'chein halacha. But according to the first opinion brought in Shulchan Aruch, mitzvah saying sichos kavana. It's a machlokes gemara. So it is explained to Ploini Almaini, you're not getting punished for bitul mitzvah shofar because mitzvah saying sichos kavana. You were makayim mitzvah shofar. So what's my sachar? No sachar. You're getting 3 months in Gehenna for being over on a Shavuos. You're not being punished for bitul mitzvah shofar because mitzvah saying sichos kavana. But you're not getting awarded for shofar. Because to me it's a milsa de pshita. We get schar for avodas Elokim. This is not avodas Elokim. You had no kavana. You had no good thoughts. You had no good incentive. You had no intention of being Mekayim mitzvah. You deserve no sachar. So he's going to be punished for being over on a Shavuos. He's not going to be punished for bitul mitzvah say because mitzvah saying sichos kavana, but he's not getting any sachar. And the same goes for kafur v'yochel matzah. The same goes for hoyu korev v'torev v'giyazman kriyas shema. According to the mandom mitzvah saying sichos kavana is yotzi kriyas shema. He's going to get sachar for Talmud Torah. He's not going to get sachar for kriyas shema because he had no intention to be makayim mitzvah kriyas shema. Lani is daiti lamando mitzvah saying sichos kavana is yotzi yedei chayva, but it's not going to get any sachar because you get sachar for avodas Hashem, and technically you're makayim the mitzvah, but it's only technically, and therefore there's no sachar. We get sachar for avodas Elokim. We get zachar for oise nachas ruach liyotzrei. But our case is different than mitzvah saying sichos kavana. The mitzvah saying sichos kavana, at least yotzi yedei chayvosei. He doesn't need to do the mitzvah again. Hayoshe b'sukkah b'shas yedidus geshomim lo yotzi yedei chayvosei. He needs to perform the mitzvah again. And why is that? Because it's different. But Mr. saying sichos kavana, he didn't do an aveira. At Tekeya L'Shir and Rosh Hashanah, he did an aveira. But that's just because there's a shavuos of a shemuas kol. But regarding other mitzvahs, if not for the shavuos of a shemuas kol, he's not doing an achas ruach, but he's also not making a Kodesh Baruch Hu angry. Yishas yedidus geshomim shofach loikitan al pona va'omar eini chofetz b'shimushcho, and therefore it's more extreme. Technically, it's a mitzvah. Lo yotzi yedei chavoseh, and he needs to perform the mitzvah again. Kach nera la'anius daiti. Another example, which will be even a greater chiddush to you, in my opinion, and I wrote this a few different places in my Sforim, Minchas Osher Kloli HaMitzvahs, מנחסו שמסכת קידושין, מנחסו שעל התורה פרשס קורח, חומש במדבר. Lani is daiti, a person that does a mitzvah al yedei shliach, the shaliach gets 100% sachar, and the mishaleach gets nothing. Nothing. So a person is too lazy to do bedikas chametz. He makes a shaliach. Who gets the sachar? The mishaleach? Isn't that a chutzpah? You are lazy. You went to bed. You sent a shaliach, and you have 5 homes, and he traveled from one house to the other. He spent an entire night doing bedikas chametz for you, and you think you're going to get the sachar? No. The shaliach gets all the sachar because he actually was the one that did the mitzvah. You did nothing. You made a shaliach. So what? So the Hagdorah that I wrote, Ein shlichus bizgulo. Shlichus applies only to dinim, not to zgulas adavorim. Person makes a shliach to murder a person, to kill a person. According to Shammai Azokein in Kedushin Mem Gimel, yesh shliach ledavar aveira. We pass can ein shliach ledavar aveira. According to Shammai, yesh shliach ledavar aveira. And the mishaleach is chayev misa. Could the shaliach be a shliach tzibur? Yomim neron for musaf? You killed a person. Could he be yoyde leduchim? He says, I didn't do anything. Shlicha shalodam kamoisai. He's the culprit, not me. I did nothing. Shlicha shalodam kamoisai. The mishalech is chayev misa, but the shaliach is a roitzeach. Ein shlichus bizgulo. Shlichus applies to dinim. Shlichus is a pipe, and the pipe has a misanenet. What's a misanenet in English? I don't know. Sometimes words escape me.
Filter.
A filter, yeah. Sgulas advorim, haresha v'hatzidkus are not transferred by shlichus. They're filtered out. The semiconductor of shlichus applies only to dinim. By avera, it is the mishalech that's chayiv malkas chayiv misa. By mitzvahs, it's the shaleach that is yoytzi yedei chayva. But tzidkus atzadik, v'rish as harosha, is only on the person that actually committed the act. And therefore, shlichus shalodam kemoisei, there are many mitzvahs. We could be mekayim al yedei shliach. But the sachar belongs to the shaliach and not to the mishalech. So I remember Rashi in Kedushim Mem Aleph. Mitzvah bo yoisem b'shluchoi. Rashi says, ki ose gufe b'mitzvahs mekabel sachar tfei. So Rashi says, if you do the mitzvah yourself, you get more sachar. Doesn't that indicate that if you do the mitzvah the shliach is still getting sachar? I say, yeah. When you do a mitzvah the shliach, you're going to get sachar because you cared and you worried, and maybe you paid the shliach money. So you do get some sachar. You did something to make a Kodesh Baruch Hu happy. So there is a certain degree, a certain level of avodas ukeil, different than a tekeil ashir. But the sachar al etzem kiyum mitzvah is 100% the shaliachs and not the mishaleachs. So that is another example of the difference between technically being mikayim a mitzvah and kedushas a mitzvah. Who has the sgula of mitzvah gereres mitzvah? The shaliach or the mishaleach? To me, the shaliach, not the mishaleach. The kedusha, the tahara, the schus, the sachar, is only the shaliach. He is the one that was toreach. He is the one that actually performed the mitzvah. The mishaleach gets sachar because he cared. He made the effort. He took the time to send the shaliach. If he paid him money, he gets even more sachar. because he was willing to spend money in the service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And for that, he deserves award. He deserves sechar. But Zgulas HaMitzvah is by the Shaliach, not the Mishalech. I know this is a Gavaldig Chiddush. It goes against the place in Yoredeya, Simachov Ches. Who says the bracha when you send the Shaliach to be Makayim a Mitzvah? That's a Mogen Avraham Tov Lamed Beis, the Shaliach and not the Mishalech. Does that prove my point? Not necessarily. The reason the Shliach says the bracha is because in the shir I spoke about Berchas HaMitzvah. I explained that there is no bracha only on an active Maisa. When you passively are Mekayim a Mitzvah, there is no bracha. So maybe the reason the Mishalech doesn't say the bracha is not because it doesn't get sechar, but actually because, that is one of the klalim, one of the yesodis of Berchas HaMitzvah. So, what I want to make clear, the tzad hashava between three sugyas, shlichus, mitzvah sein sichas kavona, when you sit in the sukkah b'shas yeridas gishamim. Technically, it's a mitzvah, but regarding the tetzos of the mitzvah, it's different. But these three examples are three different levels. They're not the same. When you make a shliach to perform a mitzvah, after all, you're an oved elokim. You sent him. He's doing it for you. You paid him, you made the effort. And therefore, you're definitely on a higher level than a tekei l'shir that had no rotzen, no will, no interest in being Mekayim a mitzvah. So tekei l'shir is a lower level. He gets zero sechar. In the case of Tkiyah Shofar, he gets an einish. In the case of matzah, no sechar, no einish. He didn't do an aveira, but he also didn't perform a mitzvah. The same by other cases of mitzvah saying sichas kavana, when a person performs a mitzvah technically, but with no intention of serving a Kodesh Baruch Hu. Scenario number 3 is our sugya. You're sitting in the sukkah b'shas yeridas geshamim. So the way I reconcile the kasha of the Oinig Yom Tov, if there is no mitzvah, then it's also banoah. I say there is a mitzvah. Technically, there's a mitzvah, and therefore there cannot be an isser hanoah. Because it can be an isser hanoah when you're mekayim a mitzvah. But it's nikra hedyot, no sechar, and it's even a brocha levatala. Because Chazal were the ones that were metakan berachas mitzvah, and they were the ones to say, in this case, this is a mitzvah that a Kodesh Baruch Hu does not want. Shofach lo kitten al ponav v'omer lo eini chafetz b'shimushcha. My strongest raya regarding shlichus is a Rosh. So the Rosh Perek Vav Masechet Chulin brings a big machlokes between Rabbeinu Tam and other Rishonim. Person had a baby boy. He made a moyel shaliach. When it comes to the bris, another person that was also a professional moyel jumps in, grabs the child, and does milah. So Perek Vav Masechet Chulin is Perek Kisui Adam, and there's a big sugi about Asor HaZehuvim, Choytev Mitzvah Misharam Asor HaZehuvim. And the Rosh brings a machlokes. Does moyel number 2 need to pay Asor HaZehuvim to moyel number 1? Some Rishonim say yes, he took away his mitzvah. Others say it's not his mitzvah. He is just a shliach. Asor HaZehuvim is just if we take away the mitzvah from the person, the mitzvah belongs to him. It's not your mitzvah, you're a shliach. But the big question is, why doesn't moyel number 2 need to pay Asor HaZehuvim to the father of the child? Shlichus shel Adam k'moiseh. And if you jumped in unauthorized, you're not a shliach of the father. You took away the mitzvah from the father, not from shliach number 1. And none of the Rishonim even talks about this. Why doesn't moyel number 2 need to pay the father? Shachosh Mishpat Shin Pei Beis proves from this machlokes that there is no shlichus b'milas haben. And if a father is not malis son, he's mevatel mitzvahs asay. But the shach is a das yochid. Yes, the Ktsois HaChoshen agrees with the shach, Choshen Mishpachim ben Beis. And I say the shach and the Ktsois are a das yochid. Then Amorei Samech Daled says shlichus does apply. And according to all the lamdas, shlichus applies. And that is also minig oilam. It's also minig oilam. Very few fathers do milah themselves. They could learn. They could do it. But they don't. So why doesn't Moil number 2 need to pass on to the father? In my opinion, the father lost out anyway. The moment you made a shliach, you're out of the picture. You're yoitza, but you get no sachar. So why do I need to compensate you? I didn't take anything away. If you made a shliach, you lost out. You no longer have a shaykhis to this mitzvah. You're not a balaveda. You're just getting schar for the effort. You made an effort. Doesn't matter who at the end of the day did the milah. You made your effort. You're getting schar because you appointed a shliach. So you're going to get your schar anyway, regardless of whether the shliach was mal or not. So this Rosh proves my point. When you perform a mitzvah in the shliach, it is the shliach that gets the schar. It is the shliach that has the mitzvah, and not the mishalech. So coming back to our fundamental sugya, I think this is a gewaldige yesod. Probably sounds a tremendous chiddush to most of you, but not to me. To me, it seems to be very pushed. Many times I apologize to my talmidim. I don't think I was ever machadash anything in my life. Whatever I say seems to me, it seems to be so pushed. So I don't think I'm a machadash at all. I think this is what the Rosh says, and Rabbeinu Tam and the Rishonim. It's the only way I could really understand the Rosh. So, Yesodon Shel Devarim. There are different matzavim in which a person technically is Makayim a mitzvah, but he doesn't have Zgulas a mitzvah, he doesn't get Schar mitzvah. And one of those matzavim are, so we brought two very broad-based fundamental sugyas, Shlichus b'mitzvahs and Kavanah b'mitzvahs. But our sheet is about a very specific halacha. Shas Yeridas Gishome Mitzvahs Sukkah. Doesn't even apply to the entire spectrum of mitzvah, because Shafach Lekitan Alpona we only find by Yeridas Gishome. Any other form of mitzvah is not Shafach Lekitan Alpona because that's more personal. Heat, cold, bad smell, mosquitoes. It is only by Yeridas Gishomim. Moshe la'evet shemoza kois la'rabbi v'shofach lo'ikiton al ponav eini chafetz b'shem mishcha. And therefore, it's a mitzvah. There could be no iser hanoah. But yes, it's a brocha levatona, eino mekavel sachar v'nikra hedyet. So before saying goodbye, let me just share a very brief thought with you because it's so relevant in the middle of this pandemic. We need a lot of rachamei shamayim. In the entire period of Aseh Yimei Tshuva, I spoke a lot about din and rachamim. How do we transform din to rachamim? So the Riyah Kodesh says, Succos b'Gematria Tzadik Aleph. And that is the combination of Shem Havaya and Shem Adni. Adni is 65, Havaya is 26. Together it's 91. Adni is Din, Havaya is Rachamim. The Goen says, Moza kois la'rabbi v'shofach lo'ikiton al ponav. What is Mezigis HaKos? What's Mezigis HaKos? Mayim and Yayin. Mayim is Rachamim, Yayin is Din. So when we come to be Makayim Mitzvah Sukkah, it's Moshe la'evet shemoza kois la'rabbi, shofach lekiton al ponav. Tofresh Lametes, the Be'er Hate, of course, Mari Weil. Kol Kai Mitzvah Sukkah Kilchos Nasa Shutuf LaKodesh Baruch Hu B'Masa Bereishis, and it's a pillar. What's the shaykhs between Mitzvah Sukkah and Masa Bereishis? By Masa Bereishis, Chazal say, Bereishis Boru Elokim, Vayomer Hashem, Tchila Ola B'Machshov Livra Yisraelim B'Midas Adin. Ro'a HaKodesh Baruch Hu Sheinu Olam Eskayim, Shituf HaKodesh Baruch Hu Midas Arachmim, V'Egdimu L'Midas Adin. That's a special school of Succos, and that is why Nasa Shutuf LaKodesh Baruch Hu B'Masa Bereishis. That's my pshat in the Mari Weil quoted by the Be'er Haitiv. Simchas Beis HaSha'eva, we learn in Sukkah Nun Aleph, the greatest Tanoim were jugglers and entertainers. And they used to juggle with fire. Beis HaSha'eva is about water. Why did they juggle with fire? Once again, the Zohar Kodesh, Tikunei Zohar, says fire is din, mayim is rachmim. It's the Ramban in this week's parsha. Mi yaminoi eish das lomai. The Ramban says yamin is rachmim, eish is din. Soid godol, midas adin klula barachamim. So Simchas Beis HaSha'eva is about to shafta mayim besosan. They threw fire, juggled with fire. And when you juggle, your right hand throws, your left hand catches. Left gives to right, right throws to left. So it's a shilav of small doiche min mekareves. Small in yamin din varachmin. Water and fire din varachamim. Water and wine din and rachamim. That's what Sukkos is all about. Transforming din to rachamim. And when Midas Adin is Mishpia Rachamim, those are the greatest Rachamim. Going back 50 years, I hear it from my great Rebbe, from the Kloisenberg Rebbe, a gewaldige Wort. It's one of the greatest ones I heard from him. Meiredik. So Rashi writes in Sukkah Daf Nun Aleph, regarding Simchas Beis HaSha'eva, Yesh Zorkim Arba v'yesh Zorkim Chomesh. No, Yesh Zorkim Arba v'yesh Zorkim Shmoina. Some of them through 4 and the others through 8. And the Kloisenberg Rebbe in his unique, very special style asked, in keinem nicht geworfen 5, in keinem nicht geworfen 6, in keinem nicht geworfen 7. You know, when you have a school in which you teach boys to juggle, we could assume we have 300 kids that were successful in juggling 4. Only 200 could do 5. Only 150 did 6. Only 100 did 7. Only 10 did 8. So how come? Yesh Zorkim Arba v'yesh Zorkim Shmoina. How about 5, 6, and 7? So the Kloisenberg Rebbe said, Rabban Gamliel HaZukan wasn't a juggler. And Simchas Beis HaSha'eva wasn't a circus. They didn't just juggle. Yesh Zorkim Arba k'neged Daladoisiya Shel Shem Havaya. And the greatest of the greatest, Zorkim Shmoina, they knew the sod of Havaya and Adnei. Dalad Oisias Havaya and Dalad Oisias Adnei. They drew 8. And I add on, I think if Rabban Gamliel decided to just juggle to make his Einiklich happy, he would burn the house down. It's either 4 Keneged Havaya or 8 Keneged Havaya and Adnei, 5, 6, and 7. He would burn the house down. Because I don't think Rabban Gamliel went to a school to learn how to juggle or how to do funny things. Whatever they did was with Kavonas and Yehudim and Tikunim, Yesh Zorkim Arba v'yesh Zorkim Shmoina. To Mishpia Midas HaRachamim mitoich Midas Adin. And it is those Rachmim that we need. Sidra Agro, Ashley of Oratzian, and the Posuk. The Gvurois Eish Das Lamai. The Goan says, those are the biggest Rachamim. Begvurois Yesha Yeminoi. And the Posuk, Lamanatseach, Begvurois Yesha Yeminoi. Yemin is Rachmim. Gvurois is Den. the Goan says, when din is mishpia rachamim, that's the utmost rachamim. And that is why we say, machal keil chayim bechesed, bebirchus hagevuris. Those are the rachamim that we need right now with this terrible pandemic. Shakadosh Baruch Hu yirachem al shayis hapleiton, v'yagoylo rachamecho al midoisecho, v'tisnahig imonu b'midas harachamim. We should only know rachamei shemayim. We should have a shana toiva mesuko, and we should be able to go about with our abotzes Torah, not through Zoom, but we should once again be able to bring people together physically, hundreds and thousands. Have a beautiful Yom Tov and a gesinte winter and a git kvittel to all of you.